Good morning, students. Recall that last week we treated chapter 2, which had the title The Land and People of Nigeria. We looked at the evolution of Nigeria, the population, the vegetation, and the effects of Sahara and Atlantic Ocean in the evolution of Nigerian states. Today, we are going to treat chapter 3, which has this topic, Centers of Ancient Civilization in Nigeria. We are going to start with the introduction. And as we had earlier noted in chapter 1, that most Eurocentric historians did not believe that great civilizations occurred in Africa or in Nigeria in the past. But through the works of the archaeologists, we have been able to know some of the places where early man lived in some parts of Africa and in Nigeria in the very remote past. Some of the places where man lived in Nigeria in the past include Nok, Igbo-Ukwu, Ife, Benin, and a host of others. They are usually referred to as centers of ancient civilization. The history of these centers of ancient civilization presents us with the scientific and technological development of the early Nigerian societies. We now come down to objective. At the end of this chapter, students should be able to describe the different evolutionary stage of man in Nigeria, examine the significance of the various centers of civilization, differentiate between the various monuments, establish their historical significance, acquaint themselves with the stories of the Hermetic hypothesis, the ancient man in Nigeria. The early man in Nigeria existed in four major stages. The four stages are the early Stone Age, middle Stone Age, late Stone Age, and the coming of the metals. We have to note that most of the early fossils we study now are not considered direct ancestors to Homo sapiens, but are closely related to direct ancestors and are therefore important to the study of the lineage. We now come to early Stone Age. We will look at the characteristics or what characterized the early Stone Age. The ancient man's presence in Nigeria was identified particularly through archaeological finds. The early Stone Age period in Nigeria lasted between 2 million years before Christ to about 35,000 years BC. The earliest known evidence of this was the discovery of the portion of the skull of a Near-Man creature near the Chad Republic. It was named Chandotropos and regarded as the earliest accepted type of human being, Homo erectus. This early Stone Age man, Homo erectus, made beautiful and finely worked stone tools in the form of picks and bifaces or hand axes. In Nigeria, large numbers of these tools had been found in many places on the Jos Plateau and at Ngauda near River Gongola. The early stoneman engaged himself in the gathering of white fruits, seeds, roots, leaves, and in hunting as a means of getting food. Towards the end of this stage of man's development, fire was discovered, probably by accident. This discovery was important to man because it contributed a lot to the improvement of his standards of living. In cold weather, man used fire to warm himself up. He used it as an aid of hunting. It gave him light in the dark. It enabled him to roast and later cook his food. He used it for protection against wild animals. The Middle Stone Age covered the period from 35,000 BC to about 2000 BC. It is a period between the early Stone Age and the late Stone Age. The people of the Middle Stone Age were either Homo sapiens or still closer to him than the early Stone Age man. They used smaller and better finished tools made from stone flakes or blades. Some of the tools were small hand axes, but others were reduced to points and probably attached to wood and used as spears or as knives. The spears must have made it possible for the people to attack and kill more dangerous animals from a distance. During this period, man was still a hunter and a gatherer. Middle Stone Age sites in Nigeria include Okpa Rock Shelter in Afikpo, the Jos Plateau, and the Leru Hills north of the plateau. We now talk about the late Stone Age. The late Stone Age lasted from about 15,000 before Christ to about 500 BC when iron was introduced. This was the stage in human evolution when the true man, that is Homo sapiens, emerged. Although stone tools were still being used, they were polished and some of them hafted, that is hard wooden hands fixed to them. Bows and arrows were invented, and their use made hunting more meaningful and rewarding. Tiny stone tools called microliths were developed and used effectively as arrows. The greatest achievement made by man at this period were the discovery of agriculture and rearing of animals. The domestication of animals and discovery of agriculture brought about tremendous changes in the life of the early man. They encouraged human beings to live in groups and peacefully too. Man became sure of steady and dependable supply of food. They enabled man to control his environment instead of depending on the conditions and changes in his environment, as was the case in the previous man's developmental stage. Settled life became possible and man used his leisure to think of ways of improving his living conditions. The idea of living together made the making of laws for harmonious living in the community necessary. Thus, the domestication of plants and animals set in motion changes that brought human civilization. Other innovations brought about by these discoveries include the ideas of leadership or kinship, status and social grouping, accumulation of wealth, human cooperation, and division of labor. In summary, we can say that the Neolithic era or the Late Stone Age had far-reaching consequences on the early man because it enabled him to live a settled life where he was sure of food and shelter. The discovery of agriculture paved way for division of labor and numer- numerous crops, which were exchanged via trade by barter. It gave rise to increase in human population and subsequent needs for governmental institutions. The coming of metals, the Iron Age. The early man in Nigeria gradually advanced to the stage where metal instruments made of bronze and iron were used. This was the Metal Age. There is no accepted agreement among scholars of Nigerian history about the origin of the knowledge of metal work, particularly iron, and how and from where it reached Nigeria. While some scholars point at the former city of Meroe, that is Sudan, as the source of the spread of that knowledge to Nigeria, some others claim that the now extinct city of Carthage, Tunisia, was the actual source. A third school of thought, however, feel that knowledge of iron work must have developed in Nigeria itself, independent of any external influence. Having discussed extensively on the story of human development in Nigeria, which was subdivided into early Stone Age, middle Stone Age, late Stone Age, and the coming of the Metal Age, our attention shall now be turned to the places in Nigeria where early civilizations occurred. We are now going to look at some early centers of civilization in Nigeria. And the first to consider will be the Nok culture in northern Nigeria. The Nok culture. The Nok culture is an early Iron Age population whose material remains are named after the Ham village of Nok in Kaduna State of Nigeria. It was there that the famous terracotta sculptures were first discovered in 1928. The Nok culture provides evidence of the earliest ancient civilization of Nigeria. The Nok culture appeared in northern Nigeria around 1500 before Christ and vanished under unknown circumstances around 500 after death, having lasted approximately 2000 years. The Nok were an extremely advanced society with one of the most complex judicial systems of the time and the earliest producers of life-size terracotta in the sub-Sahara. The Nok terracotta statues. The most enigmatic and intriguing aspect of Nok culture and their terracotta statues, the figures, which date back to at least 500 before Christ, are always people with large, mostly elongated heads, with almond-shaped hollow-looking eyes and parted lips. Microscopic inspection of the clay used in the terracotta shows it to be remarkably uniform over the whole Nok area, suggesting that the clay came from a single yet undiscovered source. Not much is known about the purposes of these peculiar sculptures, but some theories have suggested they were used as shams to prevent crop failures, illness, and infertility. Others have suggested that they represent high status individuals who were worshipped by the people. However, the construction of life-size statues is not the only evidence of the advancement of their society. Research has revealed that the Nok people had a highly developed system of administration to ensure law and order. The disappearance of Nok culture. A sharp drop in the volume of pottery and terracotta in soil layers suggests that the once thriving Nok population declined fairly rapidly, and no evidence can be found of their existence after 200 AD, nor has any evidence been found which suggests a reason for their disappearance. Some have suggested that overexploitation of natural resources and a heavy reliance on charcoal may have played a role, while others have said it could have been any number of different possibilities, including climate change, pandemic, invasion, epidemic, or famine. The Nok culture or civilization left a remarkable cultural legacy for the people that followed after them, but there are still many unanswered questions about the Nok, from why they disappeared to the true purpose and nature of the unique and mysterious terracotta statues. Significance of the Nok culture. 1. The Nok people are famed, skilled craftsmen and are also good sculptors. They smelt iron into different ornamental forms like bracelets, necklaces, and earlobes. Nok people smelted iron ore into iron implements like knives and hoes, which they used for farming purposes. Nok culture might have diffused into other parts of Nigeria like Igbo-Ukwu, Ile-Ife, Benin, and Owo. Nok culture proved that Nigerians produced and used iron tools and weapons dating back 500 before Christ, thereby disproving the biased report of the Hermetic historians. We shall discuss Hermetic hypothesis in the later pages, who stated, albeit falsely, that knowledge of iron working diffused into West Africa from Cushitic Meroe. Having discussed the Nok culture and its significance, we are now going to look at the Igbo-Ukwu culture. Igbo-Ukwu is known as the ancient center of iron and bronze smithing with its famous archaeological site. It is about 40 kilometers southeast of Onitsha in Anambra State of Nigeria. The Igbo-Ukwu sites have been dated back to the middle of the 9th century AD, which will make the Igbo-Ukwu culture the earliest known example of bronze casting in the region. Igbo-Ukwu crafts are intricate bronze metal works that indicate invention and high technological culture that made use of various metals not common in the area. The excavations at Igbo-Ukwu were carried out scientifically by a leading African archaeologist, Professor Thorsten Chow, and other archaeologists between 1957 and 1960. As attested to by Thorsten Chow, look at what the man had to say, that the archaeological research which followed this chance discovery at Igbo-Ukwu has yielded first-class ancient cultural remains that now form a significant part of the heritage of Nigeria and Africa as a whole. We now look at the significance of Igbo-Ukwu cultural finds. 1. The sacred bronze vessels suggested the existence of a ritual or semi-divine king who used the sacred vessels for ritual purposes. The Igbo-Ukwu finds depicted the originators of this artifact as skilled craftsmen who developed advanced forms of social and economic organizations during the period under review. The Igbo-Ukwu finds seem to convince archaeologists and art historians that stylistic Igbo-Ukwu terracotta appears quite different from those of the Benin and Ife and was produced mainly through the serpedios or lost wax method of bronze casting. The last one, Thorsten Chow's work at Igbo-Ukwu, contributed in no small measure in putting Igbo land on the Nigerian map of glamorous art center. With this, we now enter Ile-Ife culture. We want to know the pride or place the Ife culture have on the people of Nigeria. Between the 12th and 15th centuries, Ile-Ife, the birthplace of Yoruba people, flourished in bronze and iron arts. Queen Luo, the 21st One and only female monarch of Ife, was said to have paved the streets of Ile-Ife with cracked pebbles and broken pottery. Again, Graham Corner submits that Ife first attracted the attention of modern scholars between 1910 and 1911, when Leo Frobenius, the German ethnographer, discovered evidence of an ancient artistic tradition in terracotta and bronze. Between 1928 and 1939, more bronze heads were accidentally discovered at Ile-Ife. More archaeological excavations were carried out at Ife since 1959. The archaeological excavations, according to Conan, has resulted not only in many more objects being found, but also in sufficient evidence being collected to show that Ife art is a genuine cultural expression of the early Yoruba people, unassisted by outsiders of any art. Significance of Ife culture. 1. Ife artworks show a high level of technological development. Similarities between Ife bronze works and Sodo bronze suggest that Swedo bronze found at Jeba, Teda, and Jinaga were manufactured at Ife and were later taken to Nupe through trading relationship or cultural borrowings. 3. Similarities between Nok and Ife terracotta suggest that Nok culture, Nok sculptors must have taught Ife people the art of bronze making and iron smelting. 4. Some Ife bronze heads served as portraits of their rulers, such as the Oni of Ife. 5. Some Ife artworks were used to demonstrate the occupational pursuit of the Yoruba tribal group. For instance, a woman plaiting the hair of another woman. Most of the Ife artwork serve aesthetic purposes as they were used to adorn the palaces of Yoruba Obas. We now go into the Benin culture. We look at the contributions of Benin civilization to Nigerian and African area. Benin's work of art is better known to the outside world more than the artworks of any other Nigerian community because Benin is the most foremost Nigerian city to come into contact with the outside world. Benin's contact with the outside world started with a visit of the city in 1472 by Rio de Siqueira, a Portuguese. Lourenço Pinto, the captain of a ship that carried missionaries to Warri in 1619, confirmed the greatness of Benin by describing Benin Kingdom as larger than Lisbon. All the streets run straight as far as eye can see. That was the report of Lourenço Pinto. We are now going to look at the significance of the Benin culture. Number 1, Benin artwork shows a high level of technological development. Some Benin artwork, like bas reliefs, serve aesthetic purposes as they were used to beautify the palace of the Oba. The choice of Benin ivory as the Festac symbol in 1977 demonstrated the sophisticated nature of the Benin bronze marks culture. This is where we will end today's lecture. Next week, we shall look at chapter 4, titled The Tradition and Origin of the Nigerian People. Thank you so much.